Welcome to At the Heart of It, where we talk about life, celebrate creativity, champion entrepreneurship by getting to the heart of the why behind what we do. I'm Bryton Udy, and today I'm really excited about our guest. If you live in Canada, are interested in staying up to date on business and tech news, but have not heard of The Peak yet, you are in for a real treat with this episode, because my guest today is the CEO and co-founder of The Peak, Brett Chang. Thanks so much for joining me, Brett.
Thanks so much for having me, Bryton. I'm excited to be on.
Yeah, so before we really get started and jump in and get into the nitty gritty, why don't you share a little bit about The Peak and how you got started and honestly what The Peak is all about? I love it, but I'm excited for you to kind of share, what the Peak is all about.
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. And The Peak is a Canadian media business. We're focused on making business fun. Our main product is a daily newsletter that we send out to 30,000 of the smartest Canadians. It's a fun, quick overview of the top 4 to 5 stories in Canadian and global business. We've also got a TikTok that's doing pretty well, where we tell interesting Canadian business stories, and that's got almost 10,000 followers on it. And we've got our lifestyle product Day Off, which is recommendations of the best things to see, do, eat, watch, read for Canadians by Canadians. So that's The Peak.
There you go. That's awesome. How many subscribers do you guys have now?
Yes, we just hit, it's funny, we hit 25,000 about a week and a half ago, but we've recently surpassed that, and so we're just over 30,000 now.
Okay, there you go. That's amazing. I think I found out about The Peak through LinkedIn,
Cool.
I'm fascinated by not only, and I can't wait to get into all like the reinventing old news. Like an email newsletter is nothing new, but the way that you've implemented it is really, really interesting and unique. But I'm also fascinated about the virality that you've started to build around The Peak and the adoption. And I believe it was Connor and Dustin from Local Laundry, who are actually previous guests on the show, shared the Peak link on LinkedIn. And I'm really interested to learn more about your strategy and how you've started to build almost like a referral campaign in that way, to drive adoption for the newsletter. Like what was some of the strategy and thought process behind that?
The way I see it is that growth is a puzzle, and you're always trying to find that next piece to kind of complete the whole thing, and you never really know what that piece will be. And so it's a bunch of experimentation to see what works and what doesn't, and slowly but surely you kind of all put it together. But in many cases, some of the earlier stuff that you do doesn't scale and doesn't help you get up to that next point. And so when we started The Peak, we originally thought that it was going to be really tough to get to 10,000 subscribers. And once we got to 10,000 subscribers, it would be kind of a pretty easy ride from there. And that definitely has not been the case. But the earliest things that we did to grow were, for the first 1,000 subscribers, we really just shared it with friends and family. So anyone who we thought might be interested within our network, we would just send an email to them saying, hey, this is a project that I'm working on. Would love for you to subscribe. Through that, I think we got close to 1,000 subscribers. At that point, we really wanted to validate if we could scale this thing with paid advertising. And so we tried running contest ads where we were giving away free AirPods if you entered your email and signed up to the newsletter. That was good and helped us kind of grow really quickly, but the quality of those subscribers were pretty low in that they would subscribe, They might read 1 or 2, and they might just unsubscribe shortly after that because they were interested in the giveaway, not so much in the newsletter itself. And then the third tactic we used to kind of go from, let's say, 1,000 to 5,000 was how you saw The Peak on LinkedIn. And that was a lot of brute force, to be honest with you. And I think Connor and Dustin in particular, I got to know them because they just reached out to me at one point saying they read the newsletter. And I responded to them and I said, hey, I would love if you share it on LinkedIn. Here are some examples of what other people have said. And that personal testimony and endorsement of the newsletter on LinkedIn, a channel where, 1, you can get huge reach because there's not a ton of content, and 2, you can stay on for a long time on people's feeds. Those 2 factors really helped us get some virality. And again, that was mostly brute force, though. That was me messaging everyone I knew and asking them to share on LinkedIn. And it was a great way for us to get to kind of 5,000 and onwards. But it's interesting because I feel like that chapter of our growth is kind of closed. I can't do that anymore. I've exhausted my network. Maybe I can come back to it later, but that has been kind of put aside.
There you go. I'm curious how you asked people to do that. I know that you kind of framed it a little bit, but how did you frame that ask? I know that a lot of, I mean, I'm working with a client right now. We were just actually walking through a referral template or a actually review template email that their sales team could send out after somebody had actually purchased their product, kind of go to Google and do a review. But how did you position that ask for people to share the newsletter or the sign up on LinkedIn?
I would say for between 100 to 150 of the people who I originally reached out to have share on LinkedIn, those were just close friends or personal connections of mine. So that was just me asking them to do me a huge favor by sharing on LinkedIn. And I tried to make it as easy as possible as I could for them. I took the referral link, I sent it to them. I sent examples of what other people said so they could copy those, post quickly, and be done with it. And so that's one thing I did. Now, for the more extended ones, I think Connor and Dustin would be in that category. I had kind of two ways of doing that, or actually maybe three ways of doing that. One would be an exchange. And so if there was something that we could give them, let's say an ad in the newsletter, we would offer that. I think Connor and Dustin are pretty well known in Calgary, and they've got a pretty big network there. Yeah. And so I had a feeling that would be really helpful. And so I think we offered them an ad placement in the newsletter. We also find, too, that I think we are oversaturated in Toronto. And so I try to get out to places like get people in Calgary sharing, get people in Edmonton, get people in Victoria sharing, because I just find that we have more success in those communities. The second thing I would do is that anybody who added me on LinkedIn, so I share a lot on LinkedIn just in terms of our business and how it works and how we're growing. And we do this thing called Build in Public, which is we try not to hide much from our readers and from other people who might be interested in what we're up to. And so I share that on LinkedIn. Right. Through that, a lot of people end up connecting with me just because they're interested in what we're doing. And that's great. And so what I'll do is if they connect with me, I'll send them a video message on LinkedIn asking them to share. And that's, again, just like doing me a big favor. And that, we're a small company and we're trying to grow and it'd be really helpful. So that's been good. Those are kind of the main ways that I've done it. I think you get diminishing returns the less connected you are to that person. So if I wanted to cold outreach a bunch of people and ask them to share on LinkedIn, it'd be challenging. Even if they're readers of the newsletter, it's challenging. Those are kind of the main tactics we've used. We've also, as you mentioned, established a referral program. So there are incentives. If you do share and get so many subscribers, if you get 5, you get stickers. If you get 15, you get a mug, so on and so forth. That's been really helpful as well.
There you go. All the way up to a MacBook, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, no one's hit that
incentive.
No one's hit that yet, but I can't wait for the day that they do.
No kidding. That's amazing. Something else I found really interesting, and I kind of alluded to the question before, is that a newsletter is nothing new, and I'm fascinated by this with you, and it's so fascinating to learn about how you approached building the Peak as an email newsletter. Like, I see it as it's old news. It's an old type of delivery, and yet you've made it fresh and something that people want to open every day. It's fascinating seeing people on LinkedIn start sharing screenshots of the actual newsletter on LinkedIn and going, this is my favorite part of my morning, is being able to have a cup of coffee before I start my day and get a little, Cole's notes, if you will, of the news. And it's fun, it's quick, it's snappy, engaging. Like, where did that concept and idea come from to use email in the way that you are, but making it fresh and something that people actually look forward to opening?
I think the biggest trend here is that Canada is usually about a year to 2 years behind the US on a number of different things. And I think media is a great example of it, but there's a number of different industries where you're starting to see, I've got a friend of mine, he runs this company called Properly. They're pretty similar to a company called Open Door in the US. And I think there's a lot of different type of industries that are just where Canada lags. And so I think that's kind of what we identified, to be honest with you. We looked around at all of our friends and our network, and we noticed that they were primarily getting their news, especially their business news, from these U.S. sources. And not just any U.S. sources, they were getting them from newsletters, like Morning Brew and The Hustle and The Skim. And we just couldn't find a Canadian equivalent for that. And if we compared what those newsletters were doing to what Canadian outlets were doing, those newsletters were taking the same content. They were just making them fun and fresh and putting them in a format that was bite-sized and quick to read. where compared to something like the Report on Business or the Financial Post, they're longer form, more complicated, not particularly engaging in terms of how they write. And so we thought there was an opportunity in Canada to take what we've seen work really well in the US, but put a Canadian flair on it. And this is actually what we hear a lot, which is people tell me that they were reading the Morning Brew before. That was kind of their daily routine. Now they've unsubscribed from the Morning Brew and they're reading us because they just wanted more Canadian content. They want to know what's going on here at home. And so that's kind of the void that we filled. And I'll be honest with you, it's not a particularly, like you said, it's not a particularly inventive concept. It's not like we really innovated on something. I think what we just saw was that there was room in the market for a Canadian version of what we saw working so well in the US. And I'm not going to say we ripped it off, but we were heavily inspired by our contemporaries down there. And and we just started writing about Canada stuff.
It's funny. My dad always says that, and he's an entrepreneur in his own right, done very well, but he's always looked at the States and said, in Canada, we have a crystal ball. Like, we can actually see what's going to happen 1 to 5 to 10 years down the road based on what's happening down there, because we just are that much slower to adopt and to adapt to different industries. Like, it's all over the place. So I love that that's a bit of the inspiration for that. One other thing when I look at the news, and I think the news is so fascinating, especially over the last year and a half with COVID and everything, is there's a lot of opinion within the news. And I actually heard a podcast of a gentleman named Kim Moody. This is kind of his quote is, the news is all pretty much opinions now to a large extent. And he's like, I don't need opinions. I need the facts in order to create my own opinions. And what I have really noticed, and I'm curious if this is intentional with you guys, is the copy and the stuff that you guys write, there's no opinion there. It is very factual. It is very straightforward, to the point, yet you do it in a fun, light way. That's what I really love, I think, most about the Peak, is just being able to open up, go, here are the facts, here's the 2 paragraphs about this story. If you want more, you can look at this source. But was that intentional when you started writing the newsletter, to make sure that it was more fact-based and there was not a ton of opinion built in? Was that kind of part of the process, or?
Yeah, that for sure was deliberate by design. Going into it, we wanted to make sure that we had as big of an audience as possible. And when you start infusing opinion into stories, you limit the growth. And we wanted to avoid that at all costs. And so every time we write a story, we do multiple checks over it to make sure, like you said, it's just the facts. Now, I think we do have these kind of zoom out or bottom line sections at the end of each story where we try to identify a bigger theme attached to it. I think at times those can be, I wouldn't say it's an infusion of opinion, but it is just something that we're noticing. It's an observation. But even with those, we do, on many occasions, find that there is too much opinion infused into them and water them down to make it more broader and less specific. And I think that's really important. I agree with you. I don't think it's as bad in Canada as it is in the US, but the polarization of the media, I do think, is a real problem. I think there's a lot of people who are just tired of that. And so there's definitely an audience for just fact-based media.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you. I think it's starting to happen more and more in Canada as well. Like you start to see, especially with COVID. I mean, this is personal belief, but you look at the media has not had this much attention in a very, very long time. And some of the scare tactics that are built in at times are what scares me is they're holding on to as much attention as they can because that's their business, right? And that's what I feel is really interesting with you guys, is going, okay, here are the daily vaccination rates. And here's 1 dose and here's 2 doses. And it is fascinating just to open it up and be able to get that snapshot and not have to, open the Apple News app as an example, or listen to a news conference that is going to be tilted one way or the other. You're just getting the straight facts.
We've been really lucky in that from the beginning of the Peak, we just wrote for ourselves. So, when people ask us all the time, how do you pick the stories that go in? And really, we just kind of go through the news of the day, and whatever we find interesting, we put in. And lucky for us, there's a bunch of other people who also find that interesting as well. And so we've been very fortunate in that where, when we put something like the vaccine tracker in, we put that in just because we wanted to know ourselves. How was Canada doing? How many vaccines have we distributed? How do we compare with the rest of the world? And so we put that in ourselves. I think it's a combination of both having a close relationship with our readers, but also being the readers ourselves makes it a lot easier. And I think that many media companies can lose that connection with their reader, and they start writing for themselves and not necessarily for what their readers want. There's no reason why the Star or the Globe or the National Post couldn't do what we do, really. Like, it's not particularly inventive. They just haven't. And I think that part of that is because they've kind of lost touch with their reader or with readers of a younger generation.
Right. And I think this is a perfect spot to switch gears a little bit and going, as an entrepreneur, you're scratching your own itch. Like, that is 9 times out of 10, any advice that any entrepreneur gives any starting entrepreneur is scratch your own itch, right? Is try and solve a problem that you would like to see solved, and do it for yourself first, right? So I'd love to learn more about your story as an entrepreneur and how you got started, and is that something that you've kind of found as an identity at a young age, or was that something that you went, I saw this opportunity and thought I should jump on it? What was your personal journey like through entrepreneurship?
It's probably more the latter. I remember I was graduating from university. I went to U of T, and all of my friends had grad schools lined up or different opportunities that they were going to jump into right after school, and I just wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I was graduating with a degree in poli-sci and history, and I didn't have a clear path in front of me. So I went back to what I knew, which was politics. That's kind of what I grew up in and was working in the most. Now, I do think there are parallels between politics and entrepreneurship, and I think that was very helpful for me later on in life. But I went back into politics. I didn't like it, and so I left, and I just really wanted to get into tech. And I couldn't really tell you why, except for the fact that I would go on Crunchbase and I would see all these massive fundraising rounds, and I thought, well, this is probably a space that I should be in. At the time, the Toronto and the Canadian tech scene were pretty small. There weren't a lot of opportunities. I think Shopify was probably just getting going at the time that I was entering into the tech workforce. And so I took a job at a place called Extreme Labs. They had a mobile dev agency, and this was in kind of the glory days of iOS and the App Store. And so I took a job there as like a low-level salesperson. I was just cold calling U.S. companies to try and get them to buy services from us. Eventually I got laid off from there, and that's kind of when I first jumped into entrepreneurship, more out of necessity than anything else. I wasn't really sure what to do, and these opportunities just kind of kept falling on my lap. And so I started a digital agency with a few friends, and I. We had a bit of a falling out with one of our partners. Not a big deal. We're fine today. But at the time, it was it felt like a big deal. And so, we kind of sold the agency to one of our partners. I moved on, and I started something called Line 6, which was a pop-up bus that we ran from a neighborhood in Toronto called Liberty Village to the downtown core. The challenge with the bus was that it was, by the letter of the law, illegal. And so we got shut down pretty quickly. But from there, I was very fortunate enough to get to know a guy named Ian Black, who was running Uber in Canada. He gave me a job. I was pretty early on the team there. I think I was just getting in as they were launching UberX. And I was stayed at Uber for about 3 years. I left in 2018, got into cannabis. I was already kind of doing some community work on that end. We were hosting meetups in Toronto and Calgary and Montreal, and transitioned into that full-time, doing some venture work. And then we ultimately ended up doing the peak after the fund. But really, entrepreneurship was never something that I thought I would do or imagined myself doing. It was more an evolution where, once I got into it and I saw how much fun it could be, how much I enjoyed it, then it was, I kind of caught the bug.
Right. There you go. And I'm curious, was there any influence kind of from your parents or your family throughout, growing up? Like, were your parents entrepreneurs or anything like that, or was it just kind of stumbled into it, as you mentioned?
Yeah, my parents were not entrepreneurs at all, but what they did do, which I am very grateful for, is they always encouraged me to kind of pursue whatever I was interested in. So if I wanted to start competing in chess, even though I was very bad at it, they would drive me around to all the tournaments and let me take a go at it. Yeah. If I wanted to play basketball, which I am also, I'm 5'7", so I'm not particularly well built for that, but they would also let me take a go at basketball. And, going back to kind of my point on politics, I wanted to kind of get more involved in politics growing up. I was interested in it. I thought it'd be a fun thing to do and kind of help me professionally. And so I was 16, and I just started knocking on doors for different politicians in my neighborhood. And, that I think really kind of gave me the confidence I needed to know that I could go out and start something. Where, the process of starting a campaign, which I was doing, in my 20s, is not dissimilar from starting a business. And if you can see all of that come together in such a short period of time, there's so many parallels to that in entrepreneurship that it gives you confidence that you can take that next step and you can go start a business. So I think that was very formative for me. And like I said, I'm very grateful to have parents that were just so encouraging of me pursuing whatever I was interested in, whatever passion I had at that time, that I also was overall curious about what the opportunities were with entrepreneurship.
Right. I have a similar story of the, door knocking. Like, I think rejection is so key in growing up, right? And being able to go knock on doors and know that the majority of the people are either they don't want you there, right? They didn't invite you, but you have a message to share, and you got to deal with the people that don't want you there, or some of the crazy experiences. And it was going into dental offices and dropping off brochures about health spending accounts that their patients could use, and to save money if they owned a business, right? Like it's but going through that stage of knocking on doors, finding out what rejection feels like, and go, it's actually really not that bad. No, isn't that bad. To push that forward. So have you experienced that much with the peak, in trying to continue to grow that and build the network? And I don't know if you guys have kind of gone through funding or anything like that. Like is that like how has that experience through the political time in your life and door knocking and that rejection kind of helped you throughout your growing the peak?
Yeah, I think the rejection is one part of it. The other part is that much of my political career was spent doing what could be only described as grunt work, whether that be labeling envelopes to send out mailers, whether that be doing data entry from all the people that went out that day and going on the computer and putting in what every address identified as their support, going out and knocking on doors for 6 hours a day when you don't want to, or being in apartment buildings where it's awkward because you're close by to other people and they hear you and you have to argue with the receptionist. The whole thing, I think, is until you get to a certain point, which I think takes a long time, a lot of it is just really getting your hands dirty. And that has probably been the most helpful experience to me in entrepreneurship, because starting any business requires that same level of dedication, but that willingness to, again, get your hands dirty. And the peak was no different, right? Like when we first started the peak, it was us writing it every day. And so we'd switch between the three of us, and it would take us about, 5-6 hours to write. It's shorter now, but at the time we were just kind of getting our figuring everything out. And so it was about 5-6 hours every day. We were switching between the three of us. We were doing it every third day. We were trying to grow the thing, which is literally us just emailing a bunch of people we knew and, not caring what they thought. It was ultimately us trying to sell ads. And so that was reaching out to people with a product and making our pitch, which is not dissimilar from what you do on the doorstep in politics. And then, we did raise some money as well. Now, I'm very fortunate that I think this fundraising process went different from different fundraising processes that we've did, in that I was lucky to have a bit of a network and people who were kind of invested in me and my success. But a lot, and even today, we're at 30,000 subscribers. We've got a writer, I think we're selling, quite a few ads these days, which is great. But a lot of it is still just me, Googling different companies and finding marketing people there and sending them cold emails and jumping on calls and pitching them on buying ads. And it's not particularly glamorous, and that's okay. That's kind of what I'm used to. That's what was happening at Uber. That's kind of been my whole career, is, I've been willing to do that. And I think that's probably what differentiates entrepreneurs from everyone else, in that you're willing to, do the tough stuff, knowing that the reward at the end will be worth it. And a lot of that was inspired by my time in politics.
Right. That's amazing. Part of selfishly for me being able to host this podcast is learn from it's almost like a therapy session for me, or one-on-one advice sessions. And one thing I love to ask about is the why. I mean, it's in our kind of one-liner at the top of the show, and it's, almost the name of the show is at the heart of it is, the why behind what people do. And I'm curious what that driving force is for you. Why journalism to an extent? A poli-sci major that worked in tech is kind of now in journalism. Like what's kind of that overarching purpose that you find within the work that you're doing in the project that you're working on with the Peak?
Well, I've had more fun working on the Peak than anything else I've done in my career, and it's just an incredible feeling to know that thousands of people, including yourself, have made us a part of their morning routine and read the newsletter, and that's very fun. I think generally myself and my co-founders were all pretty interested in the world and how it works, and businesses and how they fit into everything else, and so it was a pretty natural fit for us to do this, and it's just been fun to write about that, to learn more about it, and it's stuff that we'd be doing anyways. And so the fact that we can now make a business out of it and run it and make some money for ourselves is just perfect, and we couldn't have asked for anything better. I would say longer term with business, I think this is a question that generally goes unanswered, and so I'll probably just answer it. Honestly, I'm still pretty passionate about politics, and for me, and I think for my partners too, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but at least for me, I think the goal is that we build these businesses and we build value in the asset, because ultimately we want to have a exit at some point and then be able to devote ourselves more to what we care the most about, which in this case for me would be politics, whether that is in advocacy or working with nonprofits or something along those lines, where we can kind of take our skills that we've developed here and try to kind of cause some type of social change and inspire and support different movements. I think that's ultimately the goal for us, but in the meantime, we're just having a blast doing the Peak, and we're very lucky. It's not a business where we just started it without any type of interest in it or passion. It's just kind of us trying to make a buck or two. This really is something that we're having a lot of fun doing and really enjoying. So I couldn't be happier with it.
That's awesome. I mean, looking forward to 10 years down the road, and if politics being a big passion of yours. We sort of touched on it before, is with the media being very polarized. Obviously, there's been a little bit more polarization within politics too. I'm just curious to get your take on the current political climate, if you're open to chatting about that, and give your take on how you see. I mean, we're in Canada. We're talking about the Canadian newsletter. Like, what is your view of kind of the climate within Canadian politics right now?
Ooh, this is a good question, and one I don't get asked normally. And I think this is you mentioned it earlier on, and we do take this very seriously, in that myself and my two co-founders, we have very strong political views, as you can imagine, but we really do make an effort to not let those bleed into the newsletter. We want the newsletter to be an unbiased source of information that people can trust, and we think that's the right approach, and we're really happy with that. There are if you want a more opinionated news outlet, you can find that. There's plenty of them, as you mentioned, and that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for us, I think that's kind of our lane, and we want to stay in it. Now, I'm not going to shy away from the question, though. I think that sounds like a bit of a dodge, but I'll answer it, which is, I think we're very fortunate to live in Canada. I think it's a great country. I think there's always a lot that we can do to make it better. In particular, I almost feel, I live in downtown Toronto, and I almost feel like there are two Canadas. I think there are the people that are doing well and the people that aren't doing well, and that's a pretty big divide. And so, I live literally in the downtown core here. I think there's a lot of people around me that really don't have an understanding of what's going on outside of, our immediate radius. And if you look at different communities, disenfranchised communities in this country, whether they be in, the suburbs of Toronto, or whether they be on a reserve in Manitoba, or, whether they be in a community that's been kind of economically hard hit, like Fort McMurray, there is a strain of, there is something that connects all of those communities, which is that they feel like they are being left behind. And I think it's important that somebody finally addresses that. And I just don't feel like the leadership that is currently kind of running the country has any appreciation for that and is putting in place the big vision that's needed to bring those communities into the fold so that there is a equal distribution of the prosperity that we're seeing today.
Very well put. Very, very politically correct answer in that way. But I agree. I think that's the best way to put it without going, I'm blue, I'm red, I'm orange, I'm green, whatever, is going being able to raise all boats, right? And be able to provide the best overall experience for as many Canadians as possible, I think, should be the goal. And I would completely agree with that with that judgment on that. I love to wrap up each episode with rapid fire, so we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a second. But I'm curious, what is next for the Peak and for you? You've got 30,000 subscribers now, starting to get some more ad revenue coming through. What does the next year or two look like for you and your team?
It's a great question, and I think we're kind of figuring that out right now. I think we're at a bit of an inflection point where it's like, how do we take this to the next level? I think what I'm really focused on is, and I think what we're always kind of focused on is, one, growth, and two, revenue. I think those are the two things that any business should be focused on. And I think it's actually something that this is a problem with Canadian media, which is that they are not focused as much, especially on the growth side, as they should be. And so that for us is always priority number one. So how can we grow the Peak? How can we get in front of more people? How can we get more people reading it? That's tougher than it sounds. Like I said, I think we originally thought that it'd be 5,000 and 10,000 is easy, and then 20,000 is easy, and so on and so forth. That's not the case. I think we always struggle with what tactics we can deploy to get it in front of more people, to drive more traffic to the site, and ultimately get more conversions. So that's something that we're always thinking about and always coming up with new and different tactics to help with that. On the revenue side, I don't think we've been as focused on sales as we probably should have been, and we've given up some revenue because of that. It made sense at the time. We were so focused on growth that we really wanted to get that growth machine going before we focused on sales. But I think we're at a point now where we've kind of done that, and so now I want to kind of focus our team on sales, bring in some more people to help out on that front, and really grow our revenue significantly over the next year. And then beyond that, I think we're looking at what other products can we launch that would address different gaps in Canadian media, or at least also provide content that our existing readers of the Peak might like in addition to that. And so we've started doing that with Day Off, which I think is a neat, fun, light publication that is really just a bunch of links of cool stuff that you can check out. I think we kind of want to continue to grow that and see if there are any other opportunities. There's probably an election coming up this year, so perhaps we'll do a short kind of election pop-up newsletter where we'll kind of provide updates on what's going on with the election, the same kind of tone and format as our daily newsletter.
Which I think would be great, by the way. Yeah. Especially with, I don't know if you've seen, what is that Netflix documentary about the social media? Social dilemma. Yeah. And the bias that start to be built into the algorithms based on what you interact with, right? So to be able to get both sides of the conversation in an unbiased format, I think would be fascinating and really, really helpful. So I interrupted you, but I'm just like, that's a great idea, and I'm totally in on it.
Well, no, that's great to hear. And this is it. When we develop these new products, we really do want to come up with content that our existing readers would appreciate. And so what happened with Day Off was that we would put a bunch of links into the bottom of the daily newsletter and Peak Picks that were very kind of lifestyle-y, and we would see those links do exceptionally well. So we thought, could we just create another newsletter where we would take those links, put a bunch more in, and would that be something that our readers might like? Same thing with the election news. I think you're exactly right that people like reading the Peak because it's unbiased and they can see both sides. I think we'd want to do exactly that for the election. I think there'd be a lot of appetite there. And then, more broadly speaking for us, the Peak is a brand. We have products underneath that brand. And so how can we grow and build that brand of making Canadian business news fun, or making Canadian news fun, generally speaking? I think there's a bunch of things we can do with that. So, one, the TikTok remains a priority for us. It's been fun to kind of build that up. And, I did a story on TikTok yesterday that got 130,000 views. It's incredible. You can go super viral on TikTok very quickly, and so we want to continue to do that. Tell stories on our other social channels, which I think are equally compelling, and then we just see a bunch of opportunity in Canadian media that we're really excited to kind of go out there and capture as much of it as we can and build the Peak brand. Run events, build a community, all kinds of stuff to do. But we're the toughest thing is staying focused. And so we're focused on the daily newsletter and growing it. That's our number one priority for all the investors listening.
Exactly. There you go. I'm excited about what's next. Like I said, I open it every morning. I love it. One more question before rapid fire, because I'm curious how your experience has been on TikTok. At heart, we focus primarily on content creation and creating podcasts and YouTube shows for clients and stuff like that. And so I'm curious how the experience with TikTok has been. Obviously, you've had some success stories with your stories that you've done on TikTok. But what has that experience been like for you, and how did you start to structure those posts? Like, what was that process like?
I'm sure you see this in your business. Taking the first step is truly the hardest thing. So, I've seen people on TikTok go from, 0 to viral very quickly, and I couldn't figure out how to do that. We would try a couple things and it wouldn't really work. And so I ended up kind of doing my research, seeing what other people were doing that were going viral in a similar type of space to us, and seeing if I could copy that format. And so I found a couple people who were doing a format that I liked. I kind of saw what worked and what didn't. And so I replicated it with whatever resources I had. And so that was like me trying to figure out how to do editing, how to film as scrappily as possible without having a bunch of overhead. So once I figured that out, really it's experimentation. And again, you'll be well familiar with this, but it's trying out a bunch of different stuff until you see what the algorithm likes. And, once you get a taste of what the algorithm likes on TikTok, I think the best approach is just double down on that, grow your audience as much as possible. And then, once you're at a certain scale, I probably will go back to experimenting again with different formats and styles. But, really, I tried a bunch of stuff. I was doing vaccine updates that were doing really well. So I'd say, hey, Canada has received or is receiving 10 million Pfizer doses. This is what it means. Or, Alberta has lowered the age to 8. Anyone over 18 can book a vaccine come Monday. Those would do really, really well. But my biggest kind of takeaway was that those views would not convert to follows. That was, I think, a truly rented audience that was just there to receive the information and then jump off or swipe up to their next video. What I ended up doing was I made a video about, I think it was Nav Bhatia, the superfan, the Raptors superfan, and I told his story in a format that I saw other people do, and that one took off. It got over 100,000 views, it got 10,000 likes or whatever, and once I saw that, then I started replicating that for a bunch of different type of Canadian business people, and those have ended up being kind of our specialty. And so through those, I've done a bunch of them. Some of them take off, some of them do okay, some of them do bad. But that's okay because I've seen enough now that I can know that if I keep doing this and you consistently put out content, the ones that take off will really take off, and that those will convert to followers. And so we're almost at 10,000 now. And but it's a frustrating experience. But once you get the hang of it, it is a lot easier. It's different than the newsletter. Right. The newsletter, once you got the hang of it, it actually doesn't get a lot easier. But with TikTok, it really does. And so it's been a lot of fun doing that.
And do you typically set those up as series, like you mentioned? Is you kind of have the business stories, kind of vaccine stories, and set those up as kind of segments within your content creation strategy?
I try to fit it all into 1 minute, and so it's a lot of. You have to be very selective about what you include, and I think people kind of get mad at me on TikTok for that, because if you're familiar with the story, you might say, hey, you forgot to talk about this or that, or this person was on Dragon's Den, you didn't mention that. I do try to keep it pretty selective, and I do try to fit it all into 1 minute. As you can imagine, I think there's a very short attention span on TikTok, and the parts thing is, and this is possibly an issue for me right now, but I'm a bit risk averse in that I have this format that I know works, and I'm scared to deviate from that, because I have to put so much work into creating it and writing the script and producing it.
That the ROI on that is almost not guaranteed, but it's higher, more likely that it's going to succeed. So
yeah, exactly. And so I've been pretty rigid on the format, which has worked in my favor because I've seen some TikTok creators who go, one video will get 5 million views, their next video might get 2,000. And, I think I've been pretty good, consistently putting out 10,000 plus view videos. And that's because I kept to that format. But I think we're almost at the point now where I can begin to experiment again. The other thing about TikTok is that the conversion from TikTok to the newsletter is non-existent. Like you might get a couple subscribers here and there, but I treat that as just a totally different platform than the newsletter. And I think it's good for a bunch of reasons. It's good for brand. I think there will be future monetization opportunities on the TikTok alone. It's something that not many people can do. I think when I first started TikTok, my goal was to pass the Toronto Star, which we did that a long time ago, and we've just continue to grow way faster than they can. And that's just that's just a personal goal that I set.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And it's something that that's something that not a lot of other legacy media outlets in Canada can do, because it's kind of tough to know the format and have somebody who can execute on it.
There you go. That's some incredible advice. Like it inspires me to go, well, I haven't really posted a ton on it, and now it's definitely more of a focus within promoting the podcast. Like you have seen podcast sharing formats that have been really great, that you're just taking snippets from the podcast, and they've performed really well, but then you're able to build that brand and kind of spread the word about the long form episodes and all that kind of stuff.
You'd be great on TikTok, Brayton.
Which is great.
You really should get into it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I should. That'll be the next focus over the next month or two then. And then you'll have to hold me to that.
Yeah.
There you go. So rapid fire. This is one of my favorite pieces of being able to do interviews. I was in the country music world for a period of time as an artist and did a ton of radio interviews. And this was my favorite part, is when I was asked random questions
Cool.
that had nothing to do with what I did all the time. So I hope you enjoyed as much as I do. I've got about 8 here for you. So they'll be relatively quick. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. So the first one is one book that you feel everyone should read.
There's a book called Let My People Go Surfing by a guy named Yvon Chouinard, who is the founder of Patagonia.
Okay.
It's a really good examination of a very non-traditional business, which I think is a great model for anybody who wants to start a truly sustainable and ethical business, which is very challenging because of the system we exist in, but it's a very interesting exploration of that and how he's done it. And I think there's a lot we can all learn from him.
That's great. I've never heard of that book, and now I'm very intrigued. What is your favorite song, whether right now or just of all time?
I would say "Nice for What" by Drake.
Nice. Got to rep the 6.
Yeah.
Eh?
Yeah, exactly. A fun fact, I actually got, you can Google this. I got Drake the keys to the city in Toronto. And so my fandom for Drake goes deep.
No way.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Can you tell that story? How did that happen?
Yeah, my one of my co-founders today, we were starting a different business back in, this was 2014-ish, and we wanted to do lead gen for that business, so we created a petition to get Drake the keys to the city. At the same time, I knew some people in the mayor's office, and I tried to lobby for it and orchestrate the whole thing, and eventually they did it. And so I take credit for it, although it's not directly attributed to me. I do take credit for it because I kind of led the original effort.
There you go. You lit the spark.
Yeah.
There you go. That's awesome. Salty snack or sweets?
Sweets.
Okay. What's your go-to sweet?
I like chocolate stuff a lot, milk chocolate stuff, and so it could be M&Ms. It could be anything that's anything milk chocolate based is good for me.
Anything milk chocolate. There you go. Lazy beach vacation or crazy travel adventure?
I'd say crazy travel adventure, just because the story you get out of it.
Right, absolutely. Do you have any anywhere you really want to go that you haven't been to yet?
Well, a bunch of places. I really want to go to Africa. I had a trip planned for South Africa a few years ago that I couldn't go on because of work, and I really want to go because I'm just fascinated in the culture and the history of it, and I'd love to see it firsthand. There
you go. Yeah, my wife went to Africa a couple of years ago and was crazy experience being able to do the safaris and volunteer and all that kind of stuff. It's somewhere I definitely need to go as well.
Cool.
What's your favorite local small business in Toronto?
Oh, there's a cafe. This is probably the easiest one, but there's a cafe called Cafe 23 down the street from me on Queen Street, and it's they just make great coffee. They got a great patio in the back. It's just a really nice vibe, and it's a great place to work out of. And so I'll give them the shout out because I feel like I spent a lot of time there in non-COVID times. But although patios are open now, so maybe I'll spend an increasing amount of time there in the future. But I'll give them the shout out of my favorite local small business.
There you go. So 2 more, or 3 more actually. These would get a little bit deeper. But do you have one quote that you live by?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think so. Like, I think the corniest one I could give would be you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Michael Scott,
yeah,
and Wayne Gretzky, yeah.
I would say that's the corniest one, but I don't. Nothing else really comes to mind immediately.
That's so funny because that was actually Dustin's from Local Laundry.
Yeah,
that was his quote. So that's
I think it's just the most well known of our generation, and so people. I bet you I could come up with a better one, but we'll go with that for.
Okay, final answer. There you go. So the last 2, they're a little bit deeper. So the first one is, who is someone that you would like to thank for helping you get you to where you are today, and why?
Well, I think my parents would be offended if I didn't mention them. So, I think both my parents, especially my mom, has been very encouraging of all of my different entrepreneurial activities, and they've been very supportive of the whole thing. And so I'm deeply appreciative of them for their ongoing support. And then I would probably say I'll just give a second one, which would be my grade 11 math teacher, who generously passed me in grade 11 math, which was a prerequisite for university, when I probably shouldn't have been passed because he recognized that much of the content I would never use in my career. And without that, I'm not sure what I would have done. And so that was very helpful.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's great. It's thank you to grade 11 math teachers. Yeah. And the last one is, if there was a piece of advice that you could share with your younger self, what would it be?
Yeah, these rapid fire questions are good, Bryton, because they really keep you on your toes.
On the toes.
I think the advice that I would share would be not to worry as much about the future as I did. I think, if I look back on people look back on my career, and I think rightly so, see me doing a bunch of different random things, which is true. I was jumping from, running an illegal bus to, trying to get Drake the keys to the city, to doing all this different stuff. And all of it, though, led to something else that was better, even if I failed at it, than I was doing before. And so now in my life, having seen all of that, I have confidence. I have a lot more confidence when starting things and getting into new businesses and taking on new opportunities, because I know I can do the calculation in my head that in some way this will be longer term helpful to me, even if I don't exactly know it yet. And I feel the same way about the peak. I don't know where the peak's going to go. I actually have no idea if it'll get bought or if I'll be doing it for the next 20 years or, who knows. But I just have a confidence that this is going to work out in some way, even if it goes out of business, which I don't think it will. But even if it does, I just feel like that's true. So that's the advice I would give.
I think that's great. I'm 100% with you. It's almost the trust in the future, like the it's all going to work out. As cheesy and corny as it sounds, it's like it's all going to be okay.
Totally.
It will be. So I think that's wonderful advice. I really appreciate you taking the time, Brett. It's been so great to chat with you. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if anybody is wanting to now subscribe to The Peak, where can they do that?
Readthepeak.com, probably the best place to go. But Brett, I have to say, I loved this podcast. You did a great job, and the questions you ask are truly thoughtful and not what I am used to, and I really appreciate that.
That is the kindest thing that anybody can say to a podcast host. So I'm super grateful. And I hope that we can do this again. And next time you're in Calgary, next time in Toronto, I'll hit you up. But I know you were here not long ago for the Stampede. Still happening. It's going to be weird. But maybe next year, if you're in town for the Stampede, we'll show you a good time.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Bryton.